Katie, have you got a moment to comment on what happened today?
Not really. Why?
Well, because it is 10,000 students who have elected you to represent them, and they're expecting you to answer.
Sure, why not? It hasn't been a long enough meeting already. Why not?
Okay, so you spoke today of against the motion that was on the table. Could you explain the motion to the viewers? What happened exactly? This is the second reading of a motion to...
Okay, so basically the motion that was on the floor was to increase tuition. As mandated by government, the cap to that tuition increase is at 2%. So every year in all institutes, Board of Governors will have the first reading of a motion. That first reading happened at the last Board of Governors meeting for our institute. Time for us to mull over the motions, and then in the second reading, which was what happened here today, is when we approve or defeat the motion. And so the motion that was on the floor was to raise tuition fees by 2%.
And so now students are going to see a 2% increase in their costs this year coming up, or when will that take place?
The tuition fees roll out in the fall, so it would be September, and this has happened every single year for the last 10 years.
And
this is nothing new.
So every year the student union votes against the motion, every year the Board of Governors approves the motion, and this is now just standard business, even though we obviously have a very controversial point in time, and students are really questioning the amount of services they're getting at what cost.
Yeah, so I mean, as with any sort of lobbying, you know that it's a multi-pronged approach, right? So on the one level, when we're in these decision-making bodies and we're voting against these motions that are regressive and that are weakening the funding structure of our post-secondary education or our post-secondary institutes, at the same time, we have to work outside of these decision-making bodies and lobby the governments. Things like rallies, things like working collectively with Canadian Federation of Students, so United Student Movement groups that work together and lobby the governments for one cause, which is reduce tuition fees, increase core funding, reduction in interest rates, all those things, all those messagings have to be consistently.
It seemed very much to me to be the appointed members who voted for the 2% increase and the elected members who voted against the 2% increase. How do you think that fares in terms of the public's perception of the appointment of these governors to the board?
Well, as you know, that the university is a public institute, and because of that, the representatives there of government are appointed by the current government. So they're there on behalf of the government, representing the government. So they're essentially doing what they've only been instructed to do by the government.
What mechanism do we have now for feedback to remove these people if we're not happy with their performance? The elected people can be unelected. What do we do about these appointed people who have now increased student costs by 2% for next year in the midst of a very controversial time where people are just questioning in general the value of a VIU education?
Well, you would vote for a different political party. That would be the only way to do that.
And is there no means to lobby the government to remove or put pressure on these people to vote in a different way?
No. Okay, so you would be lobbying the government to lobby their appointees to lobby the government.
Who appoints these people? Is there a bureaucrat who appoints these 7 people that you could be talking to remove these 7 people?
Yeah, so I'm pretty confident that you were in the meeting and that you heard myself and Patrick speak and asking the representatives around the table to take responsibility and commit themselves to going back to their governments and echoing what the students and the interest groups have been asking of them, and that's pretty much the answer to that question.
Again, who appoints these people, and is the student union really serious about removing these people or putting pressure on the appointee of these people to change that 2% to a 0%, or in fact maybe even a rebate, given the state of affairs at the university right now?
Well, seeing as the collective work of student unions across the province and lobbying governments them directly, that's how we got the 2% cap to begin with. That's because of the hard work of student union groups. And so
2% cap.
2% cap.
Yeah.
to tuition.
Yeah.
Previously, it was deregulated, so there was no cap.
Yeah, not cut, but cap. Yeah.
Cap.
I'm here as well. Hi, Jesse. Patrick Barbosa.
Hey.
It's the government who appoints the government appointees, and so at the end of the day, people.
But when you say the government, who in the government appoints it? I mean, is this?
It's a committee. It's a committee of government. I'm not actually sure the very specifics of it. It's a committee of government. It's like a public appointment office. I think it directly reports to the Premier's office.
Okay.
So in the past 10 years, essentially, those people are getting appointed through a committee that works for the Premier's office, and so the Premier has direct oversight over that. And students aren't asked who are representing them on their boards of governors. Non-convinced faculty are asked, and so that process should be changed, and we certainly are very serious about that.
So the focus now is then on this committee that appoints the Board of Governors, these unelected but appointed governors today who have increased tuition by 2%. So the focus now is to this specific government committee within the BC government, or where is the focus? I mean, I guess I'm wondering, people are really wanting to find somebody who's responsible for this. I think we found 7 people who just approved an increase in cost to students.
I would say call the Premier's office, for sure. The Premier's office is responsible for in large part for the people who are sitting at the Board of Governors table. And so the Premier's office has to make a change in direction. We'd like to see many groups consulted in that process, including faculty groups, student groups, community groups, and at this point that's not happening.
So the construction of the Board of Governors, is that due to the University Act, or that seems to be a provincial organizational structure?
So there's right now we're certainly in a changeover because we were at Malaspina University College. Boards of governor members were appointed by that committee, and I'm under the impression that there's a change in that structure now that we're a university, and that structure is being designed. So there's actually policy being developed at this point to look at how the university will find boards of governors.
So it would be possible then to make an internal change within VIU to change the structure of how the Board of Governors is constituted, and therefore to avoid situations of having to go down to the Premier's office and ask the Premier to change the committee who changes the 8 appointed people, who changes people's tuition costs.
I think so. Yeah,
So the focus now, is that the focus of the Students' Union, to take part in the redesigning of the governance structure? I heard that
the Students' Union takes an active role in any opportunity it can to represent its members, and so I'm very certain that the Students' Union will be looking at ways to make sure that that's a representative process.
So now for the students who are upset about how the decisions are being made and are upset about their classes not being in session right now, would that be a place where they could put energy in order to move this thing forward, not just in the short term, but for the long term?
I think for students who are concerned about the strike, there's lots of opportunity to voice their political position. Part of that includes, lobbying the government to come to the table with more money, lobbying the government to give the university a new mandate. In the meantime, students are getting out there and they're talking about supporting faculty. Some students are talking about supporting just getting the semester underway, and we encourage students to bring forward whatever political perspective they have on the issue.
So is there now an active group working at the Students' Union and involved with the reconstitution of the Board of Governors?
Right now, the Students' Union is focusing on getting students back in classes. That is our priority, and so we're encouraging the union and VIU to get to the table and negotiate and get an agreement settled so that students can get back into classes. That's our focus at this point. Once the dust is settled, we'll certainly be continuing to do our work that we've always done, representing our members and making sure that every opportunity where students can be involved is given to students.
So you've met then as a student union with the Faculty Association and the administration?
On many occasions.
On many occasions. Within the last week?
Within the last week, 10 between the two of them.
10 occasions.
Between both groups, yeah, 10 occasions for
wow.
sure.
And as the student union, certainly you must play a very important role. You represent 8,000 to 10,000 people who actually pay the bills at the university. What kind of financial coercion have you attempted, or financial influence have you attempted in this particular negotiations? Certainly there must be an opportunity here as the representative of all these customers and investors to exert a financial influence on the university itself?
I don't look at students as customers, and I don't look at them as investors. I look at them as community members accessing what is a public service. And public services should be provided by the public to ensure that the public can access those services. It's really unreasonable where you have high tuition fees that make it very challenging for some members to participate in that public service, where other members get to access by virtue of being born into a wealthy family. And from my perspective, that's unacceptable, and that's why we continue to work on lowering tuition fees, affordable education, increasing grants for students, increasing funding to post-secondary, both from the federal and provincial government. There's a whole bunch of issues that are related to post-secondary.
Sure.
And so we're working on all of those, either through the Canadian Federation of Students, through the Canadian Federation of Students British Columbia, through our local Students Union office, and it's a process that's ongoing.
Hey, that's a great point. Actually, the Canadian Federation of Students. Let's move to them. UVic Student Union has recently endorsed the idea of removing itself from the Canadian Federation of Students. They're going to be endorsing in an upcoming referendum to be leaving the Canadian Federation of Students. What does the Canadian Federation of Students do for students here and now at this particular point? It's obviously a point where you really need to have a large group working for you. The Canadian Federation of Students is something that the students pay money for each semester. What are they getting from the Canadian Federation of Students right now?
I would challenge the notion that students have endorsed anything at this point. Students are considering their membership, and it's kind of one of those things where.
Well, I don't expect you to speak on behalf of UVic. The question I had.
The janitors at, say, the University of Victoria have a national organization. The faculty have a national organization. The university has a national organization, and so it makes sense to me that students have a national organization. And at the end of the day, the membership in our national organization is about $4 a semester, and so for me that kind of value is innumerable. I mean, at the end of the day, it was just 2 years ago where students won the first national system of grants, and every year that means $400 million going to the pockets of students from low-income backgrounds, and that kind of investment, $4 a semester, is by far worth that. So,
well, I guess the question was more specifically to this point in time. You had mentioned $4 per student per semester. That's approximately 4 times the amount that they get for their own radio station. At this point in time, when students really need a very strong and powerful group to be working on their interests, what does the Canadian Federation of Students, what are they doing at this point in time in the midst of this strike for the VIU students?
The Canadian Federation of Students continues to do national lobbying work, as I mentioned before. The Canadian Federation of Students was able to secure a national system of grants. For the first time in Canadian history, we have a national grant system that's accessible to low-income students. It's valued at about $400 million every single year. 2 years prior to that, the Canadian Federation of Students was able to pressure the federal government to provide an additional $1 billion for infrastructure grants to universities and colleges across the province. That helped provide things like.
But they play no specific role here in this dispute. They're doing.
The Canadian Federation of Students is a national organization. Your local students union has no care.
So the national organization at this point in time is not actually active in the VIU strike issue. They're not exerting any influence at a national level, let's say, to or using their media that they've just developed to at all bring attention to this. They're not specifically involved in.
The Canadian Federation of Students helped secure a $400 million a year grant system for low-income students. It helped secure a $1 million infrastructure grant for universities and colleges across the province.
I know we've heard that already. I'm just asking about this specific strike here. You can just say no if they've got no involvement. That's all I'm asking. Canadian Federation of Students, not involved. Actually, they're a different thing.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
They deal with national work.
Perfect.
So of course they're not here at campus on a day-to-day basis. Although the national executive rep, Mike Olson, who's a VIU student, has been on campus working with the Students Union on a whole host of issues.
And their influence doesn't carry any weight with the administration or the faculty at this point in time?
The Canadian Federation of Students doesn't work with the Faculty Association. They work with the Canadian Association of University Teachers, which is a national organization that faculty are members of. And just like the Canadian Association of University Teachers, who are not involved in the current labor dispute on any meaningful level, the Canadian Federation of Students is doing work on a national level on behalf of all of its members across Canada.
Excellent. And so, there is obviously a division over this issue in UVic. and there has been rumors of a similar effort to be made here at VIU campus. If it came onto a referendum to maintain CFS membership or remove the student union from CFS membership, would the student union take a side in that as well, or would they remain neutral?
You know what? I have no idea. I wouldn't want to surmise, Jesse. At the end of the day, the Canadian Federation of Students is a national organization, and as I mentioned before, every other member on our campus, whether it's faculty, janitors, people who are taking your cash at the registration office, all have national organizations. And so these organizations do look on behalf of their members. And I thank you very much for your time. I got to go, my friend. I got to get my daughter.
All right, guys. Thanks, eh?